The river rose in the dark. It didn't ask. It crossed the fence and took the yard like it had always been there. He stood on the porch at 4 in the morning, boots on, no light. The rain had fallen since midnight, hard, but this sound was lower, wider. Something deciding to become itself. Something moved in the water, dark fabric, dark hair, spinning slow. Not driftwood, it moved against the current. Small, stubborn. He was in the river before the cup hit the ground. Cold took his legs. The current tried to turn him. He pushed forward anyway, the body bumped him. Small, limp, warm. He grabbed the wrist, rope cut deep into swollen skin. The mark left by deliberate hands. He pulled, the river pulled back. The river spoke first. Not with words. Rivers they use pressure, volume. The particular sound of water that has decided it is done being contained. Gideon Rowe heard it at 4 in the morning. He was already awake. He was always already awake at 4 in the morning. Had been since the war. Since the things the war left behind in a man's skull. That refused to let him sleep past the hour when centuries change and mistakes get made. He lay on his back in the dark cabin. Stared at the ceiling beams. Listened. The rain had started around midnight, hard rain. The kind that doesn't apologize. But this sound was different now. Lower. Wider. The sound of something that had been building for hours, finally deciding to become itself. He sat up, swung his legs over the side of the cot, pulled on his boots without lighting a lamp because he didn't need light. 6 years in this cabin. 6 years learning every creak and shadow and cold draft. He knew this place the way a man knows a scar, by feel. In the dark, he pushed open the door. The air hit him first, wet and cold and smelling of pine and mud and something else, something older. The particular smell of earth that has been underwater and doesn't know what it is anymore. He stepped onto the porch, stood there with a tin cup he didn't remember picking up, empty. He'd meant to fill it. Forgotten somewhere between the cot and the door, the river. Red Willow River was supposed to be 50 yards from the fence. It was not 50 yards away anymore. It had crossed the fence and the scrubs grass and the low field and was now moving through his yard like it owned the property and was simply returning to inspect it. The west fence was gone, just gone. 3 rails of split pine that had taken him 2 weeks to build 6 years ago, gone like they'd never existed. The river hadn't broken them so much as simply decided they weren't relevant. Gideon stood on the porch and watched the water move. There was something almost peaceful about it. Almost. The way catastrophe sometimes looks peaceful from a distance, before it reaches you. He should go check the horse. He should go check the roof joints on the south side where the timber had been soft since spring. He should do a great many sensible things. Instead, he stood there and watched the brown water churn past his yard in the gray pre-dawn, dark, and he thought about Margaret. Because he always thought about Margaret when things went wrong. Not in the way people mean when they think about someone they've lost. Not warmth, more like accounting, a ledger of things he should have done differently and didn't and now couldn't. Margaret had been afraid of floods. She'd never said so directly. Margaret never said anything directly. But Gideon had noticed. The way she watched the river after rain, the way her jaw tightened, the way she would count the fence posts between the cabin and the water, like she was measuring safety in units of pine. He'd told her once the cabin was built high enough. He'd been wrong about that too. The river moved. Gideon watched it, and then he saw the thing that was not a branch. It came from upstream. Moving. Fast. Too fast. Spinning slow in the current the way things spin when they have no control over their own momentum. Dark fabric. Dark hair. A tangle of both, he thought, driftwood, because that's what it looked like. Debris. The flood was full of debris. Branches and fence posts and things that used to be fences, and things that used to be other people's problems upstream. Then the fabric moved, not with the water, against it, a small, involuntary resistance. The kind of movement that isn't movement so much as reflex. The body insisting on itself even when the mind has gone somewhere else. Gideon was off the porch before finished the thought. His boots hit the mud and sank. He didn't slow down. He crossed the yard at a run, which in a flooded yard in the dark meant he crossed the yard at a stumble. Tripped over something that used to be a fence post. Kept going. Hit the water. Cold. Not uncomfortable cold. Not unpleasant cold. The kind of cold that is a physical fact. A statement. The water was brown and fast, and it grabbed his legs and tried to make a decision about where he was going. He pushed against it. Made his own decision. The current spun him sideways. He corrected. Swam 3 strokes, and then the figure bumped against him. Small, limp, but warm. That was the thing that hit him hardest. The warmth. In all that cold brown water, the warmth of a human body. Still holding onto its own heat. Still fighting. He grabbed a wrist, felt skin. Felt the rope biting into the skin. Felt the swollen, cut place where the rope had been for a long time. He pulled. The river pulled harder by the time he dragged her onto the gravel bank. He was breathing like a man who had run a great distance very fast and discovered at the end that he was older than he remembered. He dropped to his knees beside her, pressed 2 fingers to her throat. Nothing. He cursed, quietly, the way men curse when there is no time for it, locked both hands over her chest, pressed. 1, 2, 3. Water burst from her mouth. She choked, rolled. Coughed with a violence that sounded like the river itself, being forced back through a smaller opening. Then she gasped, sharp and sudden and raw. The sound of lungs remembering their purpose. Gideon sat back on his heels. Let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She lay on the gravel with rain still falling on her face, and breathed. Just breathed. And Gideon watched her breathe, and felt something in his chest that was complicated, and that he didn't examine too closely. She was young. Mid-20s, maybe. Her skin was bronze, where the mud hadn't covered it. Her hair black and soaked and spread across the gravel, like ink spilled on stone. Her dress was torn at the shoulder in the particular way that fabric tears when someone holds you there and doesn't want to let go. And her wrists, both of them. Thick rope, cut deep. The skin swollen, purple, and marked in a geometry of deliberate cruelty. Gideon looked at those wrists for a long moment. Then he stood up, gathered her in his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, much lighter. The weight of someone who had been going without for a long time. He carried her inside. The fire took longer than it should have. The kindling was damp. His hands were shaking. Not from cold, he decided, from something else. The particular tremor that comes after crisis, when the body finally gets the message that the emergency is over and begins processing it all at once in an inconvenient rush. He coaxed the flame. Cursed softly. Added pine resin. Coaxed again. The fire took. He laid her near the hearth on the rug he'd bought in Santa Fe 3 years ago and never used because it seemed wasteful to put something that fine on a floor. He found his knife, cut the ropes at her wrists. The skin beneath was terrible. He'd seen wounds like that before, during the war. The marks left by restraints on men who'd been held a long time. He cleaned the wounds with whiskey and a clean rag. Found his spare blanket. The one that had kept him alive through 3 New Mexico winters and 1 very bad night in 1873 that he didn't talk about. Wrapped her in it. Found willow bark in the medicine tin. Crushed it. Mixed it with rainwater he caught from the drip at the south corner of the roof. Forced a few drops between her lips. She swallowed by reflex. Good. That was something. He sat back against the cabin wall, pulled off his soaked boots, set them near the fire where they steamed gently and smelled terrible, pushed his hat back on his head, looked at her, Apache. He was fairly certain of that. The dress, the way her hair had been braided before the river got to it. He'd been living near Apache territory for 6 years. He knew enough to know what he didn't know, which was considerable. He looked at the door. Thought about whoever had tied those ropes. Thought about whether they were still out there in the rain. A dead log to the fire till they checked the door latch. The rifle by the door. The Colt on the shelf above the hearth, where he could reach it fast in the dark. Then he sat back down. watched her breathe, and tried not to think too hard about what any of this meant. He must have drifted, because when blinked again, the fire had burned to low orange coals and the rain had softened to a hiss against the shutters. Gray light at the window cracks. Dawn, somewhere, trying. He looked at her. Her eyes were open. She was watching him, dark eyes. Black as river water at night. Completely still. The kuss of still that isn't peace. That's calculation. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a problem. They're trying to solve before the problem notices they're looking. He didn't move. She moved. Fast. Faster than someone who'd nearly drowned the night before had any right to move. Her hand found her boot. Found what was in her boot. A small knife, bone-handled, maybe 4 inches of blade. She had it up and pointed at him before he'd fully processed what was happening. He looked at the knife. He looked at her. She was shaking. Not fear, or not only fear. She was running a fever. He could see it in the flush across her cheekbones, the glitter in her eyes that was too bright to be entirely normal. Holding that knife was costing her. But she was holding it anyway, he thought. Fair enough. He put his hands up, slowly, palms forward, the universal language of I am not going to do what you think I'm going to do. Then he reached to his left very slowly and picked up the tin cup of water he'd left on the floor beside him. Held it out toward her. She didn't take it. He set it on the floor between them. Pushed it a few inches toward her with one finger. Then he put his hand back up. You can keep the knife, he said. Just drink the water first. She looked at the cup, looked at him, looked at the cup again. Then she took it, drank, in small, careful swallows. Like someone who wasn't sure the water was safe but was too thirsty to care. She didn't lower the knife. He didn't ask her to. 3 days. That's how long they lived in that particular arrangement. Her with the knife. Him with his hands visible. Both of them pretending this was a normal way to exist in a small space. The fever ran high through the first day. She slept in fits. Cried out, sometimes in Apache. Words he didn't know. He changed the dressing on her wrists twice. She didn't wake for the first change. Woke partway through the second and watched him with those flat, assessing eyes, but didn't pull away. He read that as progress. He made rabbit stew from the last of his stores. Set a bowl near her when she woke. She looked at it for a long time, then ate. Slowly, like it was testing each bite, he made cough black. Offered her a cup. She took it. He fixed the south roof joint, repaired what he could of the fence, checked on the mare, who had spent the flood, standing in her elevated stall, with the offended dignity of an animal that had not consented to this, brought in more wood. Dried the wet kindling by the fire, did not ask questions. Questions were a kind of pressure. He'd learned that from Margaret, actually. Margaret had been the kind of woman who needed space to arrive at things in her own time. You pushed. She went silent. You waited. Eventually, she told you everything. He waited. The woman watched him work. He could feel it. That quiet assessment. She was cataloging him. Measuring him against some internal standard he didn't know the terms of. On the second evening, she asked him where the river went. He looked up from the boot he was resoling. South, he said. Bends east about 2 miles down. Joins the Pecos eventually. She absorbed this. Nodded once. Your land, my land. She looked around the cabin. The rifle by the door. The single coat on the hook. 2 mugs on the shelf. A life that had been reduced deliberately to the minimum required. You live alone, she said. Not a question, yes. Long time? 6 years. She turned this over. Whatever she concluded, she kept to herself. On the 3rd morning, her fever broke. He knew it before she told him, because he could hear the change in her breathing. Deeper. Steadier. Her body finally standing down from the emergency. She woke with the gray clarity of someone who had been very sick and had come back through the other side of it and now had to deal with the world again. She sat up, slowly, tested her arms, her wrists, looked at the clean bandages. You did this, she said yes. She looked at him, direct, undecorated. Why? And here was the thing. The question he'd been sitting with for 3 days. He'd had plenty of time to come up with something that sounded good, something that sounded like a man who had his reasons neatly organized. He hadn't done that. "Why did you come back for me?" she asked, because that was the real question. Not why he jumped in. Any man might jump in without thinking. But why had he come back? Why had he carried her inside? Why had he stayed? He took his time, outside. The last of the rain dripped from the eaves. The fire cracked and settled, because no one else would, he said. She was quiet for a long time after that. He didn't fill the silence. Silence didn't bother him. He'd spent 6 years building a relationship with silence. She looked toward the window. The light through the dirty glass was pale and thin. The world outside still wet. "Still finding its shape after the flood. Gideon Rowe," she said slowly, testing the name. She'd heard him mutter it to his horse the day before. She had very good ears. That's right, Sablethorn." She paused. "My people call me Nasha," he nodded. "What does it mean?" "Owl. A beat." "The one who sees in darkness." He looked at her, at those dark, relentlessly observant eyes. "That fits," he said. Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. Like a door that had opened a crack and then thought better of it. She looked down at her bandaged wrists, ran one thumb along the edge of the cloth. Then she said, "My son." Just that. 2 words. Quiet as a stone dropped into still water. He waited. "His name is Caro. He is 5 years old." She was looking at her wrists. Not at him. They still have him. There it was. The things she'd been carrying through the fever, and the knife holding, and the careful bowl of stew, the weight underneath everything. The reason she'd been in that river. "Who has him?" Gideon said. Not a question. An invitation. She looked up then, met his eyes, and the thing that happened in that moment was not dramatic. It was not cinematic. It was quiet and small and enormous. It was a woman who had decided, after considerable deliberation, that this particular man had not yet given her a reason to lie to him. "Harlan Voss," she said. Gideon went very still. He knew that name. God help him. He knew that name. He didn't tell her that. Not then. He needed a moment. He needed a moment to take that name and put it somewhere in his chest where it could sit without showing on his face. He got up, poured himself coffee, looked out the window at the valley. The flood had pulled back overnight, left the land raw and rearranged, branches and silt and things that used to belong to other people scattered across his fields. The river was still running high but had accepted its old boundaries. Mostly. Harlan Voss. He'd last seen that name on a military dispatch. 1865, end of the war. Voss had been a major in the Union Army, which had made him Gideon's enemy in the formal sense. But the war had been over by then, and the formal sense of things had been dissolving. Gideon had been riding through Tennessee with what was left of his unit, trying to get home, trying to remember where home was. He'd heard about Voss from a man in a tavern in Memphis who'd served under him, heard things that had made him set us on his glass and look at the wall for a while. But that was 1865, ancient history, 14 years ago, and now Harlan Voss was, what? Here? In New Mexico territory? He turned back to Sable. "Tell me what you know about him," he said. "About what he's doing," she told him. It came out in pieces, not because she was being cautious anymore, he thought, but because the telling itself was hard. Some things resist being put into words, not because they're complicated, because they're too simple, too clear, too direct in their ugliness. Voss had moved into the territory 3 years ago. Land grants. Legal ones. Or legal enough. He had money and connections and the patience of a man who understood that out here, the law was mostly a direction people agreed to face, rather than a fixed structure you could rely on. He'd taken the mine site at Copper Creek. Needed workers. Had found a method of acquiring them that didn't require going through the trouble of the labor market. Apache families whose land suddenly sat on the wrong side of his surveying claims, who had no legal standing, who had no recourse, who could either work his mine or watch their children become leverage. Caro had been taken 4 months ago. Sable had spent 3 of those months trying every approach she could think of. Petition, appeal, negotiation. Every door she knocked on led to another door that led to Voss, who smiled and offered tea, and explained in very reasonable terms that he was simply providing employment and housing, and wasn't that generous of him. The 4th month she'd tried to break into the camp, they'd caught her, trussed her up, thrown her in there in the river as a message. To the other families, this is what happens. They thought the river would take you, Gideon said. Yes, it nearly did. Yes, she said again. And there was something in her voice that told him she had been fully aware of that risk and had weighed it against the alternative and made her choice. He sat down across from her, looked at the fire. Voss has the sheriff and the land office and the territorial judge in Red Rock, all of them. Money buys the same things everywhere. She said it without heat. It was simply a fact she had learned. There is a federal judge, Frick, in Cutter's Bend. He is not Voss's man, but he is far. Gideon nodded slowly. And careful, she added. He will not move without proof. He turned this over, examined it from several angles. Did not like what he found when he looked at it straight on. Because the proof problem was not Sable's only problem. The proof problem was specifically, inconveniently, historically, his problem, in a way that he had spent 16 years carefully not thinking about. He didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, "How long since they took him?" "The boy, 4 months. He's safe?" "As far as you know." Something crossed her face. Complex. "Several things at once. He was alive," she said finally. "The last time I saw him, 2 months ago. Before they stopped letting me near the camp. Alive. Not safe." She'd chosen the word precisely. He heard that. "All right," he said. She looked at him. "All right, what?" "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But all right." She studied him for a long moment. This was apparently not the answer she'd been expecting. Which meant she'd been expecting him to say something that either committed to helping or explained why he couldn't. And he'd said neither. She seemed to decide. This was not the worst answer she'd ever received. They sat by the fire as the afternoon grayed toward evening. The valley outside dripped steadily. The mare stomped once in the stable, announcing her continued presence and ongoing dissatisfaction. The fire cracked. Somewhere out over the ridge, a hawk called. Then it was quiet again. That evening, Gideon made cornbread. He was not an exceptional cook. He was a competent cook, which is a different thing. The cornbread was flat and dense and served its purpose, which was to be food. Sable ate 3 pieces. He counted because it told him something about how hungry she'd been. She ate and looked around the cabin again in that cataloging way she had. Her eyes moved across the rifle, the coffee tin, the pair of mugs, settled on the shelf above the hearth where a brass military medal hung on a nail beside a cracked Bible. She looked at the medal for a long time. "Soldier," she said. "Used to be. Blue coat? Gray." Something shifted in her expression. Not anger exactly, recognition. The acknowledgement of a category she understood. "Both colors burn," she said quietly, and went back to eating. Gideon felt that land somewhere in the middle of his chest. Pressed a thumb between his ribs where it sat. Both colors burn. He'd never heard it put that way. He'd heard it put as victory and defeat, as right and wrong, depending on who was doing the telling, as history and as wound. But never so plainly as that. Both colors burn. Yes, they had. Everything had burned. And the argument about which color of fire was more righteous seemed increasingly beside the point 16 years later in a small cabin in New Mexico territory. He washed the tin plates. She watched him. "You do your own washing," she said. "There's no one else to do it. Most men don't. Men have women to do it for them." It wasn't a question. She'd seen the Bible with 2 names inside the cover. He'd caught her reading it that afternoon. He hadn't said anything. "Margaret," he said. "She died in 72. How?" "Sung sickness. While I was. After the war, I was still. I wasn't home." He set the plate on the shelf. "Didn't turn around." "I got there 2 days after." Silence. He turned around. Sable was looking at him with an expression he didn't entirely know what to do with. It wasn't pity. He couldn't have borne pity. It was something more like recognition again, the look of someone who also knows what it is to arrive too late. She said nothing. He appreciated that more than he could have said. He woke up at midnight to a sound he knew, hoofbeats. Single horse, moving fast on the road from the south. Coming up the valley, he was standing with the rifle before he was fully awake. 16 years of training. Some things didn't need consciousness to operate. He stood to the side of the window, looked out through the narrow gap in the shutter, a rider, moving at a hard trot, pulling up short of the cabin. In the moonlight, the first clear night since the flood, Gideon could see the horse but not the rider's face. The rider didn't dismount. He reached toward the post of the porch, tied something there, fast and businesslike, like a man who has done his errand and wants to be elsewhere. Then he turned the horse and rode back south at the same hard trot. Gone Gideon waited. 5 minutes. 10. The valley stayed quiet. Just the river talking to itself and the wind moving through the cottonwoods. He went to the door, opened it slowly, stepped onto the porch, looked at the post. The moonlight was enough to see by. 2 things, tied together, small, the size of things made for small feet, a pair of shoes. Child's shoes, battered brown leather, worn at the toes. The right one had a small tear at the sole that someone had tried to mend with rawhide and hadn't quite managed, tied together with rope. Thick rope. The particular kind of rope that had spent time lately around a woman's wrists. He stood there for a moment, just stood there, holding the porch post with one hand. Then he went back inside. Sable was awake. Sitting up, she'd heard him move. She watched him cross the room to her, watched his hands, saw what he was carrying. He held them out to her. She looked at them. She didn't reach for them. She looked at them for a long time. Her face was doing something complicated that she was not allowing to become whatever it was trying to become. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were very bright. "Carrows," she said. "I think so." She closed her eyes, opened them. "He is telling me he has them. The shoes. He is telling me She stopped. Started again. "Carol won't have shoes now. It's August. He's fine without shoes in August. But when it gets cold," she stopped again. The cabin was very quiet. Outside, the river moved through the dark, carrying whatever the flood had not yet returned. "We'll get him back," Gideon said. He said it quietly, without drama. The way you say things when you mean them, instead of just wanting them to sound good. She looked at him. "You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "But I'm saying it anyway." She held his gaze for a moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found or didn't find, she made a decision. She reached out and took the shoes from his hands, held them in her lap. Both hands. "The way you hold something that belongs to someone else, and that you are keeping safe," Gideon wrote. She said after a while, "Yeah, tomorrow you tell me what you know about Harlan Voss." He didn't answer right away. "Why do you think I know anything about Harlan Voss?" She looked at him. Those owl eyes. "Seeing in darkness. Because when I said his name," she said, "you went very still. Not the way a man goes still when he is afraid. The way a man goes still when he is remembering." He looked at the fire. The coals had burned down low, red and orange, settling into themselves. "Tomorrow," he said. She accepted that. She lay back down on the rug, turned onto her side, faced the fire, held the small worn shoes against her chest. Gideon sat back against the wall, the rifle across his knees, the door latched, the window shuttered. He thought about a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 16 years. He thought about a village in Tennessee and a burning warehouse, and 3 men who had been alive in the morning and dead by winter. He thought about the decision he had made, which had not been a single decision so much as a series of small ones. The decision not to report, and then the decision not to mention it, and then the decision to accept that he was the kind of man who had not reported and not mentioned, and then the decision to move very far away and build a very small life and not think about any of it. 16 years of small decisions. Adding to this, he looked at Sable's back, the rise and fall of her breathing. The shoes still held close. Thought about a 5-year-old boy somewhere south without his shoes. Thought about what it costs. To know something. To say nothing. To tell yourself it's not your business. It's not your war. You've had enough war. Thought about whether he was the kind of man who was going to add one more small decision to the pile. Or a different kind. The fire breathed. The river talked. Outside, Red Willow Valley lay damp and rearranged and waiting. The way land always waits, patient, indifferent, ready to receive whatever happened next without particular judgment. Gideon closed his eyes, didn't sleep, waited for morning. Dawn came slow and gray and wet. It always did after a flood. Like the light itself wasn't sure yet if it was safe to arrive. He made coffee. Set a cup near Sable before she was fully awake. She opened one eye. Looked at the cup, closed the eye, then opened both eyes and sat up. She looked at the shoes in her lap, put them carefully inside her boot. She accepted the coffee. They sat across from each other in the thin morning light. The fire had gone to embers. Gideon added 2 pieces of wood. They caught slowly. Outside, birds were returning, the way birds do after storms, cautious at first. Then louder. He told her, not everything. He told her what was relevant, which turned out to be most of it. Tennessee, 1863, a supply depot for a small farming community. Not a military target. Never a military target. A major who had a grievance with a family that had lived near that depot, who had used the war as cover for a personal act, ordered the burning of the stores. 3 families had relied on those stores through winter. He'd known that. He'd done it anyway. Gideon had been assigned to the major's unit for 2 weeks. Had been there. Had watched, had said nothing. He told it flat. No justifications. He'd had 16 years to practice justifications, and had used them all up on himself in the middle of the night until he'd run out and was just left with the fact. He watched her face while he talked. She was listening the way she did everything, completely. No part of her attention elsewhere. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Why did you say nothing? I was afraid, he said, and I told myself it wasn't my fight. Different army. Different uniform. Both colors burn, she said quietly. Yes, she looked at the fire. This judge. Frick, he needs a witness. He needs a witness. You are the witness. He didn't answer. She looked at him. You know this, she said. Not accusing. Stating. I know it, he said. She nodded slowly, like she was filing something away. Outside, the valley was waking up. The horses in the neighboring property half a mile north. The cottonwood leaves catching what little wind there was. The river settling into its familiar voice after 3 days of shouting. My son, she said. He is 5 years old. He does not understand why I am not there. Gideon looked at his hands. I know. He will not understand for much longer, she said. Children adapt. That is what they do. They adapt to whatever world they find themselves in. She paused. That is the part that frightens me most. He understood that. He understood it precisely. Not that Caro was in danger, but that Caro might stop waiting, might start becoming someone else, might adapt so thoroughly to whatever world Voss had placed him in that the world his mother carried in her chest would become a stranger to him. Tomorrow, Gideon said, I ride to Red Rock. Find out what I can about where the camp is situated, whether Frick has men in the area. She looked at him, and the rest of it, he knew what she meant. The witness part, the speaking up part, the ending 16 years of careful silence part. I'll figure that out, he said. It was not a satisfying answer. She seemed to have decided to accept it for now. She got up, moved to the window, looked out at the valley in the morning light, the sodden fields, the restless river, the sky that was finally, grudgingly, considering allowing some color. Nasha, she said quietly. He looked up. My real name. My Apache name. She paused. You can call me that if you want. He considered this. What it meant to be given a real name. What it cost, Nasha, he said. She turned from the window. Something moved in her face. Small. Quick. Gone almost before it appeared. But there, the door that had cracked open the day before. Holding its position, she picked up her boot, checked that the shoes were still inside, set it back down. Outside, the hawk called again from the ridge and Red Willow Valley breathed in the direction of whatever came next. He rode out before she was fully awake, not sneaking. He left coffee on the fire, left a note, 3 words. Back by dark, weighted down with the tin cup because he wasn't sure she could read English, and 3 words was 3 more than nothing. The mare was unhappy about the mud. Expressed this at length, Gideon let her. She'd earned an opinion. Red Willow Valley, in the aftermath of a flood, looks like a room after an argument. Everything slightly wrong. Things where they shouldn't be. Silence isn't peace so much as exhaustion. He rode south along the ridge road where the ground was harder. The river below him still running brown and swollen, still digesting what it had swallowed. He thought about Voss the whole way. Couldn't not, Harlan Voss, Major, Union Army. A man who smiled like a man who had decided a long time ago that the rules were for other people and had arranged his life accordingly. The thing about Voss, the thing Gideon had never quite been able to put down, was that he wasn't stupid, wasn't reckless, wasn't the kind of man who did bad things out of rage or weakness or impulse. He did them deliberately, carefully, or with paperwork. That was the part that stayed with you, the paperwork. Red Rock was a town that had been trying to become something for 15 years and kept failing in interesting ways. It had a saloon, 2 saloons, a general store, a land office, a sheriff's office with a new sign that was already starting to warp in the heat, and a post office that also served as the telegraph station and sometimes as the dentist's office, depending on who was asking. Gideon tied the mare at the post rail outside the general store. Went in. Bought flour he didn't need, coffee he could use. Asked casual questions in the way that sounds like small talk if you're not paying attention. The store owner was a man named Prentice. Heavyset. Cheerful in the aggressive way of men who've decided cheerfulness is a business strategy. Prentice talked. Gideon listened. Voss had an office in town. Had had one for 2 years now. Corner of Main and the Wagon Road South. Very fine office. Very fine desk inside it, Prentice mentioned, as if the quality of the furniture was relevant data. Voss himself came to town once or twice a month. Very polite man, Prentice said. Always paid his accounts on time. Gideon asked about the mining camp at Copper Creek. Prentice's cheerfulness developed a small crack. Oh. That. Well. There were some people said about how Voss ran his operation down there. But those people didn't understand business. Didn't understand that this territory needed investment, needed men of vision. Gideon bought his flour and his coffee and left before he said something unretractable. He went to the sheriff's office next. Sheriff was a man named Tully, young, nervous around the eyes in the way of men who know they're in over their heads and have decided the best response is to not look down. Gideon asked about the Copper Creek camp, about whether anyone had filed complaints. Tully said there had been some confusion about some Apache families and their land claims, but that had all been sorted through the proper legal channels. Gideon asked what proper legal channels. Tully mentioned the territorial judge in Santa Fe. Gideon mentioned the territorial judge in Santa Fe was a man named Holloway, who had been involved in 3 separate land fraud cases that had all somehow resolved in favor of the same group of investors. Tully blinked, said he didn't know anything about that, said it to his desk. Not to Gideon. Gideon left, stood outside on the boardwalk in the noon heat. The street smelled of horse and dust, and the particular baked emptiness of a town that is trying to convince itself it matters. He had what he needed, which was confirmation of what he'd already suspected. Voss had Red Rock, had the county court, had the territorial system pointed in his direction, which left Frick federal judge Aldous Frick, Cutter's Bend, 2 days east. 2 days east, and a conversation Gideon had been not having for 16 years. He untied the mare, rode back to the cabin. She was on the roof when he got back. He stopped the mare at the fence post, the one surviving in my fence post, and looked up the woman, on his roof. moving along the ridge with the careful, balanced steps of someone who had done this before. She was relaying shingles, the ones the storm had lifted and left at bad angles. She'd found his spare shingles in the woodshed, found the mallet was fixing his roof, without being asked. He sat on the mare and watched her for a moment. She didn't look down. He put the mare in the stable, unloaded the supplies, made coffee, brought a cup to the base of the ladder and looked up. "Coffee," he said. "I know what coffee is. There's a cup of it down here." A pause. She came down, took the cup, looked at him over the rim with those assessment eyes. "The sheriff," she said. "Voss's. The judge in Santa Fe, also Voss's." She nodded. She'd known. She was confirming that he now knew too. "Frick," she said. 2 days east." She drank her coffee. He drank his. "We leave tomorrow," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." She looked at the roof, at the section she'd repaired. The new shingles pale against the weathered ones, like patches on an old coat, visible, functional. "You have more nails," she said. "I can finish the south corner before dark." He looked up at the south corner. She was right. The south corner needed work. "All right," he said. She handed back the cup, climbed the ladder. He stood there a moment looking at his repaired roof, then went inside to start supper. That night, she asked about the war. Not in an accusatory way, in the way of someone who is trying to understand the geography of another person. The terrain, where the soft places are. Where the stone, he told her some of it, the broad strokes, joined up in 61, too young and too certain. The certainty lasted about 4 months, and then it was just mud and waiting, and the particular boredom of military life, interrupted by the particular terror of particular violence, and then more mud. "Which side?" she said. "Confederate." She absorbed this. "You fought for slavery." He didn't look away. "Yes. Did you know that was wrong?" He thought about it. Thought about whether to give her the complicated answer or the true one. "Not in the way I should have," he said. "Not soon enough." She looked at the fire. "Men know things slowly," she said. It wasn't an excuse. It was an observation. The kind that has evidence behind it. "Women too," he said. "Women don't have the luxury of knowing things slowly," she said. "Things happen to women while men are still deciding what they think." He had nothing to say to that, because it was correct. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "Margaret," she said, "she knew you were wrong?" He blinked. The question surprised him. She never said so directly. But, she cried when I enlisted. I thought it was fear. For me. Later I thought." He stopped. "Later, you thought she knew what you were fighting for, and it broke her heart," Nasha said. He looked at the fire. "Yes," he said. "Later I thought that." Silence. The fire moved. The shadows moved with it. "She sounds like a woman worth mourning," Nasha said. "She was. And you have been mourning her for 6 years alone in this cabin." "Something like that. That is?" She paused. Seemed to be choosing a word carefully. "Sufficient," she said. "I think 6 years is sufficient." He looked at her. She was looking at the fire, not at him. Her profile, clean and still in the firelight, the set of her jaw. The particular quality of her calm that wasn't the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. He didn't know what to do with what she'd just said, so he went to bed. Lay on his cot in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and thought that the woman on his floor had just given him something that he hadn't been given in 6 years, and that he wasn't entirely sure deserved. Operation just. The idea that 6 years might be enough, that the sentence might have an end. He didn't sleep for a long time, but it was a different kind of not sleeping than usual. They left at first light. The mayor objected to carrying 2 people, registered this formally, and at some volume. Then accepted the situation with the bitter dignity of a creature who understands that objection and compliance are sometimes the same thing. Nayo rode behind him. Straight-backed, not holding on unless the terrain required it. When it did, she held his coat, not him. His coat, he noticed this, said nothing. The road east was dry enough from 2 days without rain. The territory opening up as they climbed out of the valley, red rock country. The kind of landscape that makes you feel small in a way that isn't unpleasant, just accurate. They talked some. Not constantly. In the way of people who have decided silence is an acceptable shared state and words are for when something actually needs saying. She asked about Frick. He told her what he knew. Federal Circuit Judge. Reputation for fairness, which out here was rarer than water, and more valuable. Had been trying to build a case against Voss for land fraud for 2 years. Kept running into the problem of jurisdiction and the deeper problem of witnesses who had inconvenient memories. He needs you, she said. He needs what I know. Same thing. He didn't answer. She let it sit. 2 hours out, they stopped at a creek to water the mare. Nasha slid off before he could offer a hand. Crouched by the water. Drank from her cupped palm. Looked at the current. Water here is clean, she said. Runs off the mesa. Doesn't pick up much, she nodded. Watched the creek move. My mother taught me to read water, she said. She said every creek has a personality. You have to listen to know which kind. What kind is this one? She tilted her head. Listening. Honest, she said. It goes where it's going and doesn't pretend otherwise. He crouched beside her. Looked at the water. I like that in a creek, he said. She glanced at him. Just briefly. Honest. Water is rarer than it looks, she said. He thought she might not only be talking about the creek. Cutter's Bend came into view around a long curve in the road on the morning of the second day. Small town, smaller than Red Rock. More honest about it, which made it more appealing. They rode in, tied the mare. Found a room at the boarding house, which involved a conversation with the landlady that neither of them entirely enjoyed and that resulted in 2 rooms instead of 1. And a look from the woman that Gideon filed under things that were her problem and not his. He found Judge Frick's office on the 2nd floor of the courthouse. Knocked. The man who opened the door was 60, compact, gray, whiskered. The eyes behind the wire glasses were sharp as a land surveyor's. The kind of eyes that have spent decades measuring things and trusting those measurements. Gideon Rowe, Gideon said. Frick looked at him. Then at Nasha. Come in, he said. The office smelled of paper and pipe tobacco, and the particular dry smell of old law books. Maps covered one wall, the kind that have notations in red ink, marking things that aren't right. Gideon looked at those maps for a moment. Copper Creek was circled twice. Frick listened to everything. He was very good at listening. The kind of listening that doesn't interrupt, that doesn't fill silences with reassurance, that simply receives. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I can move on, Voss. I have sufficient grounds for a federal investigation. Land fraud is documented. The labor conditions at Copper Creek. He paused. I have testimony from 3 families. Anonymous. Not enough. What would be enough, Gideon said. Frick looked at him. A credible witness. Someone with direct knowledge of Voss's character and methods. Someone whose testimony I could put in front of a grand jury in Santa Fe and have them take seriously. Silence. The kind of silence that has a shape. Someone like a former soldier, Gideon said, who served in the same theater, who witnessed specific acts. Someone exactly like that, Frick said, and kept looking at Gideon. Gideon looked at the maps on the wall, at the 2 red circles around Copper Creek, at the notations in careful handwriting, dates, names, numbers. He thought about a warehouse in Tennessee, about the smell of burning grain, about 3 men he had never known the names of who had not survived the winter. He thought about a 5-year-old boy that, without shoes, he stood up. I need some air, he said. He walked out. He stood on the boardwalk outside the courthouse. The afternoon sun was flat and white. The kind that doesn't warm so much as press down. His hands were in his pockets. His jaw was tight. He stood there and had a conversation with himself that went badly, because the argument for not doing this had always been very reasonable. He was one man, one witness. He hadn't been Voss's direct subordinate. He hadn't filed a report at the time, which meant his testimony could be challenged on the grounds that if it were true, he would have said something. He would be exposing himself to scrutiny, to questions about his own choices, to the public accounting of a thing he had spent 16 years learning to live with privately. Very reasonable, also completely wrong. He knew it was wrong the same way he'd known. It was wrong in 1863, standing in the firelight watching that warehouse burn. He'd known then. Had put knowing in a box and closed the lid and walked away from it. The box was still there. He'd just been dragging it behind him all this time and calling it something else. He heard the door open behind him. Nasha came to stand beside him. Not close, a few feet away, looking at the same empty street. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. The street was quiet. A dog moved across it at the far end with the purposeful air of a dog who knows exactly where it's going. A wagon went past. 2 children ran across the road and disappeared behind the general store. Normal afternoon. Normal town. While somewhere south of here a boy named Caro was forgetting the sound of his own name. "I know what you're going to say," he said. I wasn't going to say anything. He looked at her. She was looking at the street, hands at her sides. "Then what are you doing out here?" he said. "Standing," she said. "Sometimes standing near someone is enough." He looked at her profile, the set of her jaw, the way the afternoon light caught the angles of her face. He thought about what it cost her. To stand here and not push, not argue, not man. When her son was down there and time was moving, and every day that passed was a day Caro sat in that camp learning to answer to a different name. She wasn't pushing, she was standing. He looked back at the street. "He'll try to discredit me," he said. "Yes, he has lawyers. I have." He paused. "Nothing. A story can't prove except by telling it." "Yes, my word against his." "Yes," she said. "That is what it is." He was quiet. "My word doesn't have the best history," he said. "For keeping." She turned and looked at him then. "Direct. That is precisely why it matters now," she said. "Anyone can speak when it costs nothing. You already paid the cost of silence. Speaking now." She paused. "That is a different kind of account." He looked at her. She held his gaze. Steady, undecorated, no extra words. He went back inside. Frick looked up when he came through the door. Gideon pulled out the chair. "Sat down. What do you need?" he said. Specifically, Frick opened a drawer, pulled out a printed form, a sworn affidavit, he said, dated and signed, describing what you witnessed in Tennessee in 1863 in as much detail as you can remember. Full name, rank, date, location, everything. Gideon looked at the form. "And then what?" "Then I use it as probable cause to request a federal investigation, which takes the case out of the territorial system entirely. Out of Voss's reach, how long? If I send the request today," Frick considered, 3 weeks for the response. Another week for investigators to arrive. But in the meantime, I can issue an injunction against further activity at the Copper Creek camp. That stops him taking more people. It should. And the people already there. Frick's jaw tightened slightly. "That's the harder part," he said. Gideon understood what that meant. Injunction stopped new actions. They didn't undo existing ones. Caro was still in that camp. "I'll sign the affidavit," Gideon said, "and I'll need you to do something else." "What?" "Sit on it for 24 hours before you file it." Frick frowned. "Why?" "Because Voss has eyes in this town," Gideon said. "And I need a head start." Frick looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen. 24 hours, he said. "Not a minute more." Gideon nodded. Picked up the pen, signed his name, pressed the seal, dated it, and felt something, not relief. Not quite. More like the moment after you set down something heavy you'd been carrying so long, you forgot it had weight. It still hurt, but his hands were free. He folded his copy, put it in his breast pocket, stood up. Frick extended his hand. Gideon shook it. "I'd tell you to be careful, Ro," Frick said. "But I suspect you already know the risk." "I know it," Gideon said. He went out to find Nasha. He didn't find her in the hall. He found her in the street, talking to a man. Gideon stopped. The man was maybe 45, slight, dressed like a trader. 2 pack mules tethered to the post behind him. He had a friendly, forgettable face. The kind of face that slides right out of memory. Good at its job. He was talking to Nashka. And she was listening. Something in Gideon's chest moved in a direction that wasn't comfortable. He walked down the steps slowly, crossed the street. Nasha saw him coming. Nothing changed in her face. She just watched him arrive. The trader looked up. "Afternoon," the trader said. "Bright and easy." "Afternoon," Gideon said. He looked at Nasha. "This is Mr. Fletcher," she said. "Neutral. He says he knows the road south to Copper Creek." Gideon looked at Fletcher. Fletcher had the kind of smile that worked very hard to look like it wasn't working at all. "I run goods down to the camp," Fletcher said. "Legitimate supply contract. I know the roads. Every shortcut. Every place the trail goes soft." Offered to draw the lady a map. Gideon kept his face easy. "That's generous," he said. "Not at all. Any help I can offer." He'd offered to draw her a map to Voss's camp. Gideon looked at the mules, at the packs on them, at the fresh mud on the wheels of the small cart attached to the second mule that suggested he'd been somewhere recently. Somewhere south. Somewhere with a particular kind of red clay soil that Gideon had noticed on the road in from the valley. He smiled at Fletcher. "We appreciate it," he said. "We're not heading that direction ourselves." Just passing through, Fletcher's smile stayed perfectly in place. "Of course," he said. "Well, safe travels." He tipped his hat, walked away, unhitched his mules with the unhurried confidence of a man who has done what he came to do. Gideon watched him go. Then he looked at Nasha. She was already looking at him. "He came to us," she said quietly. "I did not go to him, I know. He asked questions before he offered the map." "What questions?" "Where we were staying. How long. Where we were going." Gideon nodded. "And you told him?" "I told him we were passing through." Heading north, he looked at her. "Good," he said. She looked down the street at Fletcher's retreating back. "He already knew who you were," she said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Gideon said. "Then Voss knows you are here, probably. And that you went to Frick, possibly." She looked at him steadily. "We need to leave." "Yes," he said. Now they were packed and moving within 20 minutes. The landlady watched them go with the expression of a woman whose suspicions have been confirmed, without her being told about what. Gideon took a different road out. Not the main one. The old freight trail along the North Ridge. Slower, less direct. The kind of road that doesn't appear on the maps that strangers carry. The mare moved at a steady trot. The afternoon was cooling fast. Clouds building to the west. Neither of them spoke for a long time. He was thinking about Fletcher, about the timing. Fletcher had appeared the moment Gideon was in Frick's office, which meant either remarkable coincidence or someone watching the courthouse, which meant someone in Cutter's Bend on Voss's payroll, which meant Voss had been watching Frick for a while, which was not surprising, but was alarming in what it implied, because if Voss had been watching Frick, if he knew a witness had signed an affidavit, then the 24-hour grace period Frick had promised was not the protection Gideon had hoped. He thought about the road ahead, the canyon section, 2 miles long. The place where the trail narrowed between red rock walls and there was only one way through. He did not think about it casually. Nasha spoke first. "The canyon, I know. We go around. Takes 4 hours longer." "Yes," she said, "it does." He pulled the mare off the main trail. Found the old shepherd's road that curved north of the canyon. Narrower, rougher, slower, worth it except. They were 3/4 of the way around when the mare went lame. Not dramatically, not a fall. Just a hesitation, a slight favoring of the left foreleg that became a definite favoring, and then a stop. The mare stood on the trail and communicated her position on the matter through posture alone. The posture said, "No further." Gideon dismounted, checked a hoof stone. Well lodged. He worked it out carefully, talking to the mare, in a low voice the whole time. She tolerated the procedure, with the resigned dignity of a creature who had given up, expecting the world to make sense. By the time he stood up, the light was going. "She needs rest," he said. "How long? An hour, maybe more. See how she walks after." Nasha, down. They led the mare off the trail, found a hollow between 2 rock formations. Enough shelter, enough grass, they settled in. No fire. He didn't want the light. They ate what they had in the saddlebags. Dried meat, hard bread, shared the canteen. The stars came out, enormous out here, the kind of sky that makes cities seem like a very small idea. Nasha sat with her back against the rock. Eyes up, my son knows the stars, she said. I taught him the Apache names. In summer we would sleep outside and I would show him. That one, she pointed, running deer. That one. Another direction. The old woman with her basket. Gideon looked up. What's that one, he said. The bright one, almost directly overhead, she looked in English. You call it the North Star, she said. We call it? She said a word in Apache that he didn't catch. It means the one that doesn't move. The one you use to find your way back. He stared at it. I've used it a few times, he said. Most people who are lost have, she said. He glanced at her. She was still looking up, her face in the starlight. Younger somehow, and older. Both at once. He's been gone 4 months, she said. To the stars. Not quite to him. At first I counted days. Then I stopped counting. Counting makes the waiting bigger, like looking at a wound. The more you look, the more it hurts. He was quiet. Does it ever? He stopped. What? Does it ever feel? Not better, but bearable. She considered this seriously. It feels different, she said. Not bearable. Different. Like you learn to breathe around it. The way you learn to walk with a bad leg. You still limp, but you move. He thought about that. About limping forward, about 16 years of a particular kind of limp that he'd gotten so used to. He'd stopped noticing the gait. You should sleep, he said. You should too. I'll keep watch. You always keep watch. Habit. She turned her head and looked at him directly. Tomorrow, she said. When we get back. What then? I think we go south, he said. I think we go before Frick files. Before Voss knows exactly what's coming. The camp, we find the camp. Find Caro. Get him out before the situation gets. Before it becomes something we can't manage. She was quiet. That is not a plan, she said. That is a direction, best I've got right now. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then, she looked back at the stars. My mother used to say that a direction is where a plan begins, she said. You don't need to see the whole road. Just the next step. He was quiet. Smart woman. Very, she said. I miss her. He looked up at the stars. At the one that doesn't move. Mine too, he said, and that was that. They sat in silence, while the stars moved slowly overhead. In their ancient and indifferent procession, the mare settled. The wind moved through the grass with a sound, like someone far away, speaking too quietly to hear. He didn't sleep, but it wasn't the old kind of not sleeping. The kind full of warehouses and regret, and Margaret's face turned toward the wall. It was the other kind, the kind where you stay awake because something matters. Because you are watching over something worth watching. Different, very different. The ambush came at noon the next day, on the road back toward Red Willow Valley. It came without ceremony. It came as 3 riders, and a 4th who stayed back, who held a rifle at a distance. The 3 who came forward did so with the casual confidence of men who have done this before. On a road that belongs to no one. Where shouting wouldn't carry. Gideon had his hand on his rifle, but the one in the back. The one with the distance and the angle and the patience. That one was the problem. Row, said the man in the middle. He was polite about it. The way that men are polite when they have all the advantages. You're in the way. Gideon said, just delivering a message, the man said. From Mr. Voss. He says he understands you've been to see Judge Frick. He says he hopes that doesn't mean you're making decisions you'll regret, he says. The man paused. He says he still remembers Tennessee, and he wonders if you do. Gideon went still. Nasha, behind him, said nothing. The mare stood steady. Good mare, tell him I remember just fine, Gideon said. He thought you might say something like that. The man nodded. Like this confirmed. Something. Which is why he sent us. It happened fast. The way these things do, the front moved. Gideon got the rifle up, got one shot off. The man on the right went sideways. Then the one in the back, the one with the angle and the patience, fire bloomed from the ridge. The shot took him in the left shoulder. Upper, not the heart, not the lung, but through the muscle and into the socket. in a way that made his arms stop working in the way arms are supposed to work. The rifle dropped. He stayed on the horse. That was something. Nasha was already moving. He heard her, heard the second shot, hers, and heard the sound of a man deciding to be somewhere else. The other riders pulled back, not gone. Regrouping. Ride, she said. Right behind him, he rode, left shoulder on fire. The mare, going flat out on a road that wasn't designed for flat out. Trees on both sides, the sound of pursuit that faded, then stopped. They got half a mile before he started to fall. She caught him, one arm across his chest, steadying him. Keeping him on the horse. I've got you, she said. He heard it distantly, through the noise his shoulder was making, which was considerable. I'm all right, he said. You are not all right, she said. You are bleeding on my arm, sorry. Don't apologize. Stay conscious. He stayed conscious mostly. They made it to a farmstead, abandoned, half a mile off the main road. He knew it from years back, empty for 2 seasons. She got him off the horse. Got him inside. Got the coat and shirt off him with a matter-of-factness that he would have been self-conscious about if he'd had the spare capacity for self-consciousness. She examined the wound. Her face gave nothing away. The bullet is still in, she said. I know. I need to take it out. I know. This will be. I know, he said. She looked at him. A look that said, stop saying I know and let me work. He stopped. She used his knife. Heated it. He didn't watch. He looked at the ceiling of the abandoned farmhouse, at the pattern of old water stains, tried to find shapes in them, found a horse, found something that might have been a tree, found something that was definitely the kind of pain that closes your eyes whether you want it to or not. When it was done, she pressed a folded cloth against the wound, tied it, sat back on her heels. She was breathing harder than she had been. Not from exertion. From something else. He looked at her. Her hands were shaking very slightly. Thank you, he said. She shook her head once, sharply, like she was shaking water off. Don't, she said. Don't thank you. Don't make it into something. He looked at her. She was looking at his shoulder, at her own hands, at the folded cloth going red. I am tired, she said quietly. Of people she stopped. Of people being hurt. He heard what she didn't say. The word she'd started and pulled back. He didn't reach for it, left it where she'd put it. But he heard it. He'd heard it. She stood up, moved to the window, looked out at the falling dark. The straight line of her spine, the set of her shoulders, the way she carried something enormous and refused to let it show in her posture. He thought about what she'd said in Cutter's Bend, standing near someone is sometimes enough. He thought he understood that now in a different way than he had when she said it. It wasn't something she'd offered him as comfort. It was something she already knew how to do, had been doing for a long time, for people who never came back for her. How far are we from Voss's camp? He said. She looked up. Half day south, she said. Maybe less if we cut through the Mesa Trail. And you know the Musk Trail. I have walked it, she said. Twice. Trying to find a way into the camp, he nodded. He tried to sit up straighter. His shoulder expressed a strong opinion about this. Tomorrow, he said. She shook her head. You need 2 days. We don't have 2 days. You need Nasha. He said her name, her real name, the first time he'd used it without being invited to. We signed that affidavit yesterday. Voss knows about it. He knows we're still out here. And he knows what I know. He held her gaze. How long before he decides the easiest solution is not to argue with what's coming, but to remove the thing coming for Caro before the investigators arrive? She was very still. He watched her process it, watched the moment. She arrived at the same place he had. Tomorrow, she said. Final. Tomorrow. He agreed. Outside, night came down over the New Mexico territory with its usual efficiency. Complete, indifferent, beautiful. The stars again. The one that doesn't move. Inside the abandoned farmhouse, a woman with owl eyes sat vigil over a man she had every reason not to trust. And he lay there and breathed, and thought about what came next, and thought about a 5-year-old boy looking at stars he was being taught not to name, and felt something sharpen in him that had been dull for a very long time. Not anger, clarity. The kind that comes when you are finally done deciding what you're going to do and have simply become the person who is going to do it. He woke before she did, first time that had happened. He lay still for a moment, listening. The abandoned farmhouse settled around him in the cold pre-dawn dark, wind outside. The mare moving in what passed for a stable. The sound of Nasha breathing steady and slow on the other side of the room. His shoulder was a dull, persistent fire, not sharp, not unbearable. The kind of pain that has settled in and made itself comfortable and intends to stay a while. He could work with that. He'd worked with worse. He sat up slowly, carefully. Testing. The room tilted, then steadied. Good enough. He made it to his feet, crossed to the window, looked out at the gray pre-dawn. The territory. The flat, dark line of the mesa against the slightly less dark sky, somewhere south of that mesa. Half a day's ride, maybe less. Caro, he thought about a 5-year-old boy waking up in a place not his, looking for a face not there, learning to answer to a name not his own. He put his hat on, started making what passed for breakfast with what they had left, which was not much so. Breakfast was coffee and determination, not ideal. Sufficient. She woke to the smell of coffee, sat up, looked at him, looked at his shoulder, at the way he was holding the arm, at the careful angle of everything. "You're moving," she said. "I'm moving. Too soon." Probably. She looked at him for a moment. He could see her calculating, running the numbers, weighing his stubbornness against the timeline, against Caro, against what Voss now knew. She got up, took the coffee he offered, didn't argue, which told him she'd the same numbers the mum had and arrived at the same answer. They rode out as the sky went from black to the particular dark blue that comes just before it decides to be morning. The mesa trail was narrow. She led, she knew it. He followed one-handed, the right hand on the reins. The left arm held close to his body. Nasha picked the path with a certainty that told him she had walked this trail in her mind many times, in the dark, alone, planning approaches that hadn't worked. He thought about those months. 4 months of knocking on every door. 4 months of being told no by men who had been paid to say no. 4 months of counting days and then stopping counting because it made the wound bigger, and then deciding to throw a flooded river because it was. The only door left, he thought about courage, about what it actually looks like when stripped of all the dramatic framing, when it's not a soldier charging a line, when it's just a mother doing the next available thing, and the next, and the next. Even the river, even that. How much further, he said. See that rock formation, she pointed. 3 red pillars catching the first gray light. Past that. The camp sits in the canyon below, guards, 2 at night, more in the day. They don't expect trouble from the north. The trail is too difficult. They underestimated the trail. They underestimated many things, she said. They left the mare tied to a juniper in a hollow below the rim. He gave her the last of the dried corn from his saddlebag. She ate it without looking at him, which was, he thought, entirely reasonable given the week they'd had. They went up on foot, Nasha first, moving through the scrub with a quiet that he recognized from the war. Not practiced quiet, natural quiet. The quiet of someone who had learned early that being heard was a form of risk. He followed as quietly as a man with 1 working arm and a bullet wound could manage, which was reasonably quiet. He hoped from the rim of the canyon they looked down. The camp was larger than he'd expected. Not a temporary operation. Not a rough collection of tents. Permanent structures. Wooden buildings arranged in a loose square. A central yard. A cookhouse. What looked like a dormitory on the east side. A smaller building on the west. Fenced with split pine, the mine entrance cut into the canyon wall at the far end. Tailing piles. Equipment. The whole thing organized with the thoroughness of a man who plans to be here a long time. Gideon counted heads, 6 men visible in the early light. Moving with the unhurried purpose of people following a routine. 6 visible. How many not visible was the question he couldn't answer. He looked at Nasha. She was looking at the small building on the west side. The fenced one, her face was very still. That's where they keep the families, she said quietly. The ones who won't work. The ones they used to make the others work. He looked at the building's small windows, high on the walls. No way to see in. No way to see out. Caro's in there, he said. Yes. And then, the door of the west building opened. A small figure came out, moving with the freedom of someone who was not, in fact, being held behind that door. Walking across the yard with a child's particular gait, the slightly bow-legged, entirely confident walk of a 5-year-old who has somewhere to be. A young man came out behind him, thin, fair-haired, not a guard, no weapon visible. He said something to the boy. The boy turned and sweared. In English, Gideon heard it. Partial, carried by the morning air up to the rim, not Caro Charlie. The young man called the boy Charlie, and the boy answered to it without hesitation, like it was his name. Like it had always been his name. Gideon turned to look at Nasha. She had gone the color of ash, not fear, not grief. Something past both of those. Something that has no comfortable name. She was watching her son cross a yard, and answer to a name that wasn't his. And the boy looked healthy. He looked fed. He looked fine. He looked like a child who has adapted, who has learned the shape of a new world and started living it because children do that. Because they have to. Because they don't have the option of refusing, which was the thing. Which was the thing that was so much worse than cruelty would have been. Because cruelty could be argued with. Cruelty was visible. Cruelty left marks. This left nothing visible. This was erasure with a smile on its face. Gideon put his hand very gently on Nasha's arm. She didn't pull away. She didn't take her eyes off her son. He's alive, Gideon said, very quietly. She nodded. We're getting him back, he said. She turned and looked at him, her eyes very bright and very dry. She had decided not to cry. He could see the decision. He respected it. Enormous the plan, she said. Working on it. Work faster. They crouched in the scrub behind a rock formation. The west building, he said. The door faces south. There's a blind spot on the north side, where the canyon wall comes close. I know it, she said. I looked at that building from every angle. You can get there. If the man at the gate is looking elsewhere, I can make him look elsewhere. She studied him. Your shoulder. I have one working arm. I don't need two for what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? The cookhouse is the loudest place in the camp. People expect noise there. If something makes noise on the east side, he paused. They look east. She thought about it. And if Voss comes out, then I talk to Voss. And if talking doesn't, then I stop talking. She held his gaze. You are not a simple man, she said. Despite appearances, I'm extremely simple, he said. I'm just also stubborn. Something moved in her expression. Almost a smile, almost. Give me 20 minutes, she said. To get around to the north side, take 15. We don't have 20. She looked at him. 15, she agreed. She went. He watched her move through the scrub along the canyon rim, low and fast and quiet. The particular competence of a person who has been underestimated their entire life and has learned to use that as cover. He checked his Colt 6 rounds. He thought, make them count. Then he started moving toward the east side of the canyon. He came down into the camp from the east, walking, not hiding, not sneaking, just walking. The way a man walks when he has decided the only bluff available is the one where you act like you belong. The guard at the gate saw him. Went for his rifle. Whoa, Gideon said, raising his right hand. The left arm held close. I'm here to see Voss. The guard looked at him, at the arm, at the blood that had seeped through the bandage and through the shirt and was visible. If you were looking. Who are you, the guard said. Gideon Rowe. He knows my name. Tell him. The guard looked uncertain. Uncertainty in guards was good. Uncertainty meant they went to ask someone. Uncertainty meant they moved toward the center of the camp and away from the west building. Wait here, the guard said. He went. Gideon waited, counted in his head. 1, 2, 3, on the west side of the camp. Behind the building with the high windows, nothing visible, but he watched the canyon wall, there. Movement. A shadow that knew how to be a shadow. Nasha 4. 5. The door of the main building opened. Harlan Voss stepped out. He was older than Gideon remembered, which was obvious. It had been 16 years. Men age in 16 years, but Voss had aged in a particular way. The way of men who have gotten everything they wanted and found it didn't weigh what they thought it would. There was something thin about him now. Under the good coat, under the calm face. Something that hadn't been there in 1863. Or maybe it had been. Maybe Gideon just hadn't known how to look for it then. Voss walked across the yard toward him, hands at his sides, unhurried. The absolute confidence of a man on his own territory, 2 guards flanking him. Staying back, the other men in the yard had stopped what they were doing. Watching, Gideon counted. 8 visible now. 8. He thought about Nasha on the north side of the west building. He kept his face easy. "Row," Voss said. He stopped 10 feet away. Looked at the shoulder, the arm. The blood. "You look terrible. Had a rough few days." Gideon said, "I heard." Voss tilted his head slightly. "I heard you've been to see Judge Frick." "I have." "Signed something?" "I did." Voss absorbed this. His face didn't change. That was the thing about Voss. His face was a tool. It did what he needed it to do, and nothing else. "I always figured you'd show up eventually," Voss said. "I just didn't think it'd be for someone else." Gideon kept his eyes on Voss. "It is," he said. Voss studied him. "That's interesting," he said. "You rode through my operation. Nearly got yourself killed on my road. Signed a legal document that's going to cause me considerable inconvenience. For an Apache woman you've known for." He paused. "What, a week?" "About that," Gideon's. Why? Because no one else would." Voss was quiet for a moment. He seemed to search for the word, remarkably simple. "I'm a simple man." "No," Voss said, "you're not. That's always been the problem with you, Roe. You're not simple. You're just afraid of what you are." He took 1 step closer. "What you did in Cutter's Bend is going to unravel things I've spent 3 years building. Do you understand that?" "I do." "And you came here anyway." "I care for the boy." Voss looked at him for a long moment. Then something shifted, not dramatic, not theatrical. Something small and real and, in its own way, more unsettling than anger would have been. Because it was recognition. "Funny thing about men like us," Voss said. "Quiet now. Almost conversational. We spend our whole lives thinking what we did made us who we are. The war, the choices, the things we didn't say when we should have." He tilted his head. "But the war just showed us who we already were." Gideon looked at him. Held the look. "Maybe," he said. "But you had a choice after. Every day. You had a choice every day after 1865, and you kept making the same one." He paused. "So did I. The difference is what we chose." Voss was silent. Something moved in his expression. Complicated. Several things at once, and then because men like Voss don't change in moments of recognition. Because recognition and change are different animals. Because the recognition can be genuine and the choice still be wrong. He reached for his gun. 2 things happened. Gideon's right hand moved. And from behind the west building, a shot clean. Single the gun in Voss's hand went sideways. He staggered, grabbed his wrist. The pistol fell in the dirt. Gideon had his Colt up, pointed. The 2 guards looked at each other, at their employer, holding his wrist, at the blood, at Gideon, at the rifle emerging from around the corner of the west building. Nasha, walking forward, steady, the rifle up. Covering the guards with the absolute calm of a woman who has been waiting 4 months for this particular moment and is not going to waste it by being dramatic. "Hands," she said. 1 word. To the guards. They put their hands up, the other men in the yard, 8 of them. Looking at each other. At their employer. At a woman with a rifle, who looked like she had absolutely no problem using it. Doing the math. The math came out the same way for all of them. Hands up. All around the yard. Gideon kept the Colt on Voss. Voss was looking at Nasha. Looking at her the way a man looks at the one thing he didn't account for. "The Northwest Trail," he said. To his I never accounted for. "No," she said, "you didn't." Voss pressed his hand against his wrist. The wound was not mortal. He knew it. She knew it. She'd aimed for the hand. Deliberate, he looked at her. She looked at him. "Where's my son?" she said. A long moment. "West Building," he said. "He's not harmed. I know he's not harmed," she said. That was never the danger. He understood what she meant. She could see it, the small flinch of comprehension. The acknowledgement that what he'd done to that boy was worse than harm. "The door," she said. "Unlocked," he said. "It's been unlocked. He could have left any time he—" "Enough," she said. "Stop." He stopped. Gideon kept his eyes on the guards while Nasha moved to the West Building. She opened the door, went inside. He waited, counted his breaths. 1, 2, 3. A sound from inside the building. A child's voice. Surprised. Then something complicated happened to the inside of Gideon's chest. The sound that came out of that building was the sound of a child remembering. Not a word, not a name. Just a sound. The particular involuntary sound that children make when something lost comes back, when something they had begun to not think about in order to survive suddenly walks through a door small, high, and then it broke into a single word, in Apache, one word. Her name. Not the English one, the real one, Nasha. He heard her voice answer, low, private. Not for anyone else. He kept his eyes on the yard, his jaw tight, his eyes stinging in a way he attributed to the dust. Definitely the dust. Voss was sitting on the ground now, holding his wrist, watching the door of the West Building. His face was doing something. Gideon watched it and saw, in the space of a few seconds, something he hadn't expected to see. Voss looked old. Not in the way he'd looked old when he walked out of the building. That had been a man in command of his territory. This was different. This was a man watching the thing he'd built. The careful legal structure, the land claims, the mine, the ordered system of leverage and control. Watching it become what it had always been. Just a man trying to take things that weren't his. Nothing more. Voss looked at Gideon. "You know this doesn't fix it," he said. "Quiet, without heat. What's broken out here? Between," he gestured vaguely, "at the territory, at all of it." "It doesn't fix anything." "No," Gideon said. "It doesn't. Then why?" "Because fixing everything isn't the only reason to do the right thing." Voss considered this. Then he looked away. The door of the West Building opened. Nasha came out with Caro on her hip. The boy had his face pressed against her neck. Both arms are around her, holding on with the fierce, unreasonable strength of a small child who has decided he is not letting go. His feet were bare. Gideon looked at the bare feet, thought about two small shoes, tied together with rope, hung on a porch post in the dark. He looked at Voss. "Get up," he said. He was moving Voss toward the main building, to secure him, to wait for Frick's men. When it happened, Voss's coat was open. A folded paper fell from the inside pocket, hit the dirt. Gideon didn't pick it up right away, but Nasha did. She was behind him. He didn't see it happen. He heard Voss make a small sound. Not a protest exactly. More like a man who has just been seen doing something private. She unfolded it. "Write it." Gideon watched her face. She read it once, twice, folded it again. Voss, looking the ground at, said, I know what it is," she said. He said nothing. Gideon looked between them. "What is it?" he said. She held it out to him. He took it, a letter, handwritten. Voss's handwriting. He knew it from the dispatches he'd seen in 1863. Addressed to someone named Daniel, no last name. No address. The letter of a man who doesn't know where to send something. He read it. It was not what he expected. It was the letter of a man writing to a son he had never claimed, who had been born to a woman Voss had not stayed with, who was now, Voss guessed, based on the year, about 17 years old, living somewhere in Missouri. The letter was not a confession. It was not an explanation. It was an apology, halting, awkward. The apology of a man who has no talent for it and is trying anyway, who is describing, in very plain terms, that he made choices he cannot undo, and that if Daniel ever reads this, he should know that the reason Voss stayed away was not because he didn't think about it. It was because he knew what he was. And he thought knowing what you are is the same as doing something about it. He'd been wrong about that. He was writing the letter to say so, in case that was worth anything. He didn't think it was, but there it was. Gideon folded the letter, looked at Voss. Voss was looking at the ground. "You never sent it," Gideon said. "No, why?" A long pause. "Because I kept thinking I'd do something to earn the right to send it first," Voss said. Quiet. Flat. "And then I kept not doing that." Gideon was quiet. He thought about a very different letter. One he'd never written, that he'd thought about writing. To no one specific. To the men in Tennessee whose names he'd never learned. To Margaret. To the version of himself that had stood in the firelight and watched and said nothing. He thought, maybe you don't earn the right to send a letter like that. Maybe earning isn't the right idea. Maybe you just send it. Before it's too late to send anything. He held the letter out to Nasha. She took it. She looked at it for a long time. Caro, on her hip, had gone quiet. Looking at everything with the wide-eyed assessment of a child processed a situation too large for his framework. She looked at Voss. He was watching her, for the first time. Not calculating, not managing, just watching. She walked to the small fire pit in the yard. The one used for burning trash. She held the letter over it. Gideon started to say something. Stopped. She dropped it in, the paper caught. Curled. Went to ash in less than a minute. Voss watched it burn. She turned back to him. That was not forgiveness, she said. Clearly. Quietly. That was a dead man's letter. It belonged to the fire. Voss looked at her for a moment, then he nodded, once. Like a man who has received a verdict he doesn't have the right to argue with. Gideon thought about what that cost her. To not keep it, to not use it. To give a man who had taken her son 4 months and tried to erase his name and his language of not being defined by his worst self in a letter he was too cowardly to send. Not forgiveness. She'd said so. But something else. He didn't have a word for it, but he recognized it. The same way you recognize a good knife, not by how it looks, by what it holds. Frick's men arrived 2 days later. Not the 3 weeks Gideon had calculated. Frick had moved faster than promised, had sent riders the same day, had not waited the 24 hours. Gideon couldn't be angry about that. Because Frick had also sent a federal marshal and 2 deputies, which meant Voss's men dispersed into the territory within 12 hours of the marshal's arrival. Which meant the camp dissolved. Which meant the Apache families being held there were released. 7 families. As Gideon watched come dunk out, stood by the canyon rim and watched them walk out into the late afternoon light. Some of them had been there months, some longer. They moved with the careful, deliberate steps of people who are checking whether the world they remember is still there. Some of them looked at Gideon. He looked back. Didn't speak. What was there to say? The marshal took Voss east in irons. Voss went without argument, without drama, like a man who has arrived at the end of something and is simply completing the final paperwork. He looked at Gideon once as they led him past. Gideon looked back. No nod, no acknowledgement, nothing performed. Just 2 men who had been in the same place 16 years ago and had done different things with it. Voss walked past Gone. Not justice. Not quite. But the direction of it. Which was something. Which was more than he'd managed in 16 years of looking the other way. They stayed in the camp that night, not by choice. Caro was exhausted and overwrought, and had cycled through every emotion a 5-year-old possesses in the space of 6 hours, and had crashed into a deep and absolute sleep on a blanket in the corner of the building that used to hold him. Nasha sat beside him. Gideon sat near the door. The marshal's men were outside, cataloging, documenting, the sound of official business being transacted in the dark. Inside, quiet, Caro sleeping, Nasha watching him sleep. After a long time, she said, "He called me Mama." "I know," Gideon said. "I heard." He remembered, yes. She was quiet. "I was afraid." She stopped, started again. "I was afraid he would look at me like I was a stranger." Gideon looked at the sleeping boy. "He didn't." "No," she said. "He didn't." She touched the boy's hair, gently. "The way you touch something you thought was gone." "He called me Mama first," she said. before he said anything else. Before he even looked at my face. He just... She paused. Gideon nodded. Children know, he said. She looked at him. How would you know that, she said, gently. Not cruel. Just asking. I don't, he said. I'm just saying it, she almost smiled. You do that sometimes, she said. Say things because they're the right shape, even if you're not sure they're true. Is that bad? No, she said. She considered. It's kind. He looked at the fire, thought about Margaret, about all the things he hadn't said that were the right foot shape, all the silences he'd chosen when words would have been kinder. I'm learning, he said. Slowly, she looked at him. Better slowly than not at all. She said 3 days later they started back north. Caro rode in front of Nasha on the mare, holding the pommel with both hands. Very serious about this responsibility. Gideon walked beside the horse on the flat sections. His shoulder healing, slower than he'd like, but healing. Caro watched him. Children watch things directly. Without the learned indirection of adults, he watched Gideon the way he watched the landscape, taking information, filing it on the second day, somewhere in the late afternoon when the light went golden and long. Caro said something in Apache. To his mother, Nasha answered. Gideon looked at her. He wants to know your name, she said. Gideon, he said. To the boy, Caro looked at him, tried the word, Gideon. Close enough. Gideon said Kakaro considered this, then said something else in Apache. Nasha translated. He asks if you are the man who helped the river bring me back. Gideon looked at the boy, at the small face, serious and open at once. Something like that. He said. Caro nodded. Like this was a satisfactory answer, entirely expected, the world operating as it should. Then he turned back to watching the road with the focused attention of a 5-year-old who has decided he is navigating. Gideon looked at Nasha. She was looking straight ahead. But her mouth had done something. Something small, something that had been trying to happen for a while. She was smiling, not a lot, not dramatically, just, and enough. He looked back at the road, walked, thought that this right here, was a thing worth walking toward. Red Willow Valley received them the way it received everything, without ceremony, without opinion. Just there. Patient and indifferent and beautiful the way land is when it has been there longer than anything living in it. The cabin was as he'd had left. Mostly. A family of Mopses had taken an interest in the cornmeal. He evicted them. The south roof section Nasha had repaired, held firm. The bridge across the creek was still standing. He hadn't expected otherwise, but he checked anyway. Caro explored every corner of the cabin with the systematic thoroughness of a child doing inventory. Picked up everything examinable, examined it, set it back. More or less where he'd found it. Gideon watched this, with an expression he couldn't entirely control. Nasha watched Gideon watching Caro, with an expression she also wasn't entirely controlling. Neither of them said anything about that. November came. The valley changed color, cottonwoods going yellow, the grass bleaching to pale gold, the river settling into its winter voice, lower, quieter. More thoughtful, the shoulder healed, not perfectly. There would be a certain angle on cold mornings when it would remind him of that afternoon on the road east of Cutter's Bend, but functional, which was enough. He heard from Frick by post. Voss had been indicted on 7 counts. The case was proceeding. The land claims were under federal review. The Apache families were being, and here Frick's careful legal language became very precise, processed for land restitution, which was a long way of saying, maybe, possibly. In time, it was not enough. It was also more than nothing. Gideon read the letter twice, then set it on the shelf. Nasha read it once. In time, she said. That's what it says. Time. She said the word like she was examining it from all sides. Men write that word like it's a comfort. Isn't it? Sometimes it's just a way of saying not now. He thought about this. Yeah, he said. Sometimes it is. She folded the letter, set it back. They looked at each other. Outside, Caro was doing something in the yard that involved a stick. And a great deal of personal narrative delivered at volume in a mixture of Apache and English. He's talking to the creek, Nasha said.
What's he telling it?
Everything, she said. He tells it everything. Like it's listening. Maybe it is. She looked at him. You sound like an Apache, she said. I'll take that. She made a sound. Almost a laugh. Closer than anything before. He counted it. The morning they planted the tree was a Tuesday. Gray sky. Cold enough for breath to show, but not cold enough for frost. The ground still workable. The river low and clear. Running quietly over the stones. Nasha had brought the sapling from the south. Wrapped in damp cloth. Carried it the whole way. Caro had asked about it twice on the road. Been told it was for the river. Accepted this. They walked to the bank together, Gideon with the spade, his right shoulder doing the work. Which was fine. Right shoulder had always been the better one anyway. Nasha unwrapped the sapling. Held it in both hands. The roots pale and delicate and specific. Caro stood at the water's edge, looking in, the creek running over his reflection. Gideon dug the hole. It took a while. The soil near the bank was stony. He worked around the stones. Found the good dark earth underneath. Deep enough. Wide enough. Nasha set the sapling in straight. Careful. The way you set something that has to hold. She knelt and pressed the soil around the roots with her hands. Working it in. Settling it. Her face very close to the ground. She murmured something in Apache. Just a few words. Quiet. Private. He didn't ask. Some things don't need translation. Caro crouched beside his mother. Looked at the small tree. Looked at the water. Then looked at Gideon. Why do we put the tree here, he said. His English. Getting cleaner every day. And every evening. Nasha Apache to him. The two languages finding their way back into the same small person. Gideon looked at the creek. At the river beyond it. At the place where the water bent out of sight. So it remembers, he said. What does it remember? He thought about that. About a river in August. About something caught in the current that turned out to be a person. About a knife held steady and a cup of water offered. About a pair of small shoes on a porch post in the dark. About a warehouse burning in Tennessee in 1863. About a name signed at the bottom of a document in a judge's office. About a woman walking out of a canyon with a child on her hip. About standing beside someone, because sometimes that's enough. Everything that happened to bring us here, he said. Caro thought about this, nodded, like it made sense, like it was the obvious answer, and he just needed to hear it. Confirmed he picked up, poked, at the base of the sapling to test its stability. Apparently satisfied, he moved to the water's edge to resume his observations. Nasha stood, brushed the soil from her hands, stood beside Gideon. Not close. A few feet. Looking at the river, he poured the last of his morning coffee over the roots. She glanced at him. For the river, he said. You say that every time you pour out coffee, she said. The river deserves good coffee. The river has never done anything to earn good coffee. It brought you here. She went quiet, looked at the water. He looked at it too. The river moved. Carrying light, carrying silt. Carrying whatever the season had left in it. Moving south in the direction of wherever rivers eventually arrive. What happens now, she said. He thought about it seriously. The way the question deserved, Spring, he said. Frick's people finish what they started. The land situation gets, he paused, complicated, for a while. Then maybe clearer. And here he looked at the cabin, at the patched roof, the surviving fence post, the bridge they'd built. Here there's work. Always work. Fence to finish. Southfield needs turning before the freeze. I know how to turn a field, she said. I know you do. A pause. Caro starts forgetting the English, she said. If we stay here long enough, we can make sure he keeps it. Gideon said. Both. Both, she repeated. Both, he said. The languages. Both of them. He should have both. She looked at him. Something in her face that was complicated. Many things at once. The way faces look when they are processing something larger than one expression can hold. You would do that, she said. Help him keep both. It's his, Gideon said. Both of them are his. Not mine to give. Not anyone's to take. She was quiet. The river moved. Caro was telling it something. earnest and elaborate, the creek responding in its usual fashion, which was moving, which was not stopping, which was taking whatever was offered and carrying it along. Nasha reached out and took his hand, not grabbing, not dramatic, just. Took it the way you take something you've decided you're allowed to have. He looked at her. She was still looking at the river. He looked at the river too, her hand in his, small, calloused in different places than his, strong in different ways. He thought about the first morning, her holding that knife, him holding out the water. The long distance between that moment and this one, not a long distance in time, 6 days. 8, something like that. Long in other ways, the kind of distance that isn't measured in miles or weeks. The kind that is measured in what you said and what you didn't say. In what you chose and what you finally stopped choosing. In what the river carried and what it left. Caro turned around and looked at them. Looked at their hands, back at Gideon. "Are you staying?" he said. Direct. 5-year-old direct. "No." Softening, Gideon looked at Nasha. She was looking at the river, but her hand didn't let go. "Yes," he said, to Caro. "Staying." Caro considered this. "Good," he said, decisively. "The creek needs more people to talk to." He turned back to the Wajia. Notch made the sound, the real one this time. Not almost, not close. She laughed quiet, private, the laugh of a woman who has been very serious for a very long time and has found something worth abandoning seriousness for. Just for a moment, Gideon felt it move through him, that sound. Like the first warm day after a long winter. Like something that had been frozen, deciding it was done being frozen. He held her hand. She held his. The little red willow tree stood in the dark earth, beside the river. New. Fragile. Specifically planted in the place where floods would test it without destroying it. Caro continued his conversation with the creek. The creek continued moving, taking everything south. Light and silt and memory and the particular echo of a morning in November, when 3 people stood on a bank and something settled. Not loudly, not with drama, just settled. The way good things do. The way land settles after water. The way a river settles into the channel it was always supposed to run in. Clear. Going where it was going. And not stopping. Not stopping for anything. That evening, Nasha put Caro to bed early, the boy protested. Then didn't. Gideon sat on the porch steps, the valley going dark around him. The river below doing what rivers do, moving. Not stopping, not asking permission. Nasha came out and sat beside him, not close. A few feet, the way she always did. The way that had stopped feeling like distance and started feeling like choice. They sat there for a while, not talking, not needing to. After a long time, she said, "Caro asked me tonight if this is home. Now. What did you tell him?" She was quiet for a moment. "I told him home is not a place." She looked at the river. "It is the people who stay." He looked at her. She didn't look back, but her shoulder, just slightly, moved toward him. He stayed where he was. The river moved below. Red Willow Valley breathed around them, quiet and full.